and it's red. So we've got a little red variant there, which means that they are homozygous for a SNP or a variant in that gene. In other words, their body cannot make the catecholamine methyltransferase efficiently. Therefore, they're not going to be able to break down their catecholamines, and they're going to be chronically high. So I know in practice, I saw a lot of people that had chronically high levels of adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, etc. And, we would counsel them on, hey, just try to relax. And, we just kind of consider them stress monsters, and maybe they needed to take a meditation class or something. But we had never considered that maybe genetically they couldn't break down those stress hormones, and this person is having great difficulty breaking those down. And again, that first variant, the V15AM, is the one we know the most about. The other two have not been studied as readily, but we know there's a close association with that first variant and anxiety disorders and ADD, ADHD. And then again, I want to impress on you this very important point, is that you can't look at each variant individually by itself. You have to look at the group of them. So this person also has a ++ or homozygous variant in the MAOA gene. If you look down six variants down, you'll see the MAOA, and they have a double there, which means that they're going to have difficulty breaking down serotonin. That's the monoamine oxidase enzyme that we're going to be talking about in detail. And so this person not only will not be able to break down adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and estrogens, but they can't break down serotonin. So they're usually a mess. They're usually just kind of an anxious mess. And then this person also has the MTHFR gene that we talked about in the first webinar, where they can't absorb B12 efficiently. So when you look at these all together, a low B12 level, probably depression, and anxiety with these other two variants there. So that's the way we're going to be looking at this, is in combination with each other. What is the result? This is the MTHFR support report. This is the other template that we've been putting our 23andMe data into. And it gives us even more. We get 42 to 44 pages of these variants, and we're starting to learn a lot more about all these different variants here, and it's getting to be a kind of an unwieldy amount of information. And so we're breaking up the methylation seminars into basic and then advanced, where we begin to study some of these other variants that are showing up and their effect on health. But you can take a look at all the different COMTs that are there. There's, I don't know, 10 or so COMTs. So each of those are going to have an effect on our ability, again, to break down those neurotransmitters. So just a snapshot again. If you look over here on the left-hand side, here's the MAOA, there's the MAOB, here's the COMT, and there are two pathways here that we're looking at: the breakdown of dopamine here, and the breakdown of dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine here on this side. There's also another little variant in here that can sometimes show up as it will inhibit the ability to break down norepinephrine into epinephrine. So MAOs also, there's not a lot of information here. We haven't heard a lot of information about how MAOs break down dopamine, but they do when we start to look at these pathways. They're definitely involved. There's a crossover there between the COMTs and the MAOs. So the COMT, again, catecholamine methyltransferase, or I hear some people calling it the COMT, breaks down catecholamines, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Gene variants are associated with working memory and ADHD. And again, don't forget, when we look at, here's the process from tyrosine to dopamine. Here are the vesicles. We release dopamine into the synaptic cleft, and then we have to have a receptor here. So you can also have variants in the receptors. And then the catecholamine methyltransferase, this happens in the liver over here, where we break down dopamine. So it metabolizes, again, don't forget that it also metabolizes the hormones estrogens. So those people in your practice that are estrogen dominant, it could possibly be a problem with their catecholamine methyltransferase enzyme, but it can also be the cytochrome P450 enzymes that are involved in phase 1 detoxification in the liver. But I just want you to remember that COMT also breaks down estrogen metabolites. Again, inactivates catecholamine neurotransmitters, inactivates carcinogenic catechol-estradiol derivatives. That's your 4 and 16 estradiols, methoxyestradiol. And the V158M variants are associated with lower enzyme activity. So that's what I want you to keep in mind too, is there are variants that have a higher enzyme activity and a lower enzyme activity, and we'll cover those as we go along. And will cause a low clearance of certain medications. And that's another benefit that's come out of us looking at our genetics, is looking at how well can we tolerate certain medications. And I think a lot of pharmaceutical companies are starting to look at our genetics this way, which, you know, I know it's probably a good thing in the long run, because they're not going to be one size fits all. They're going to be, you know, kind of sizing our medications to fit the person's genetics, which, okay. I'd like to go one step further and get the body working correctly through supplementation rather than having to resort to medications. But at least it's a step in the right direction. And it also increases the risk of breast, colorectal, endometrial, and ovarian dysfunction, and may cause anxiety, poor attention, and mood disorders. Also associated with this is a novelty-seeking personality, substance abuse, drug addictions, and again, ADHD. And so I looked up some studies. I did a little bit of research on the COMT and found a few studies here, and found one on early onset antisocial behavior associated with it, better performance on cognitive tasks, assessing prefrontal cortical function. So those people that can't break down their dopamine, it's interesting because if they're born with high dopamine levels, they do have difficulty paying attention, but they're usually smarter than the average bear. That high dopamine level will actually increase their performance on cognitive tasks and cause behavior problems. You know anybody like this? You know, where kids are, they just can't sit still in the classroom, but you know that they're super smart and they don't learn the same way, but they're labeled ADD or ADHD or whatever it is that they're going to be labeled, and they're given medications. However, these are usually the smarter people among us, so kind of a fascinating combo. COMT and anxiety, individuals homozygous for the COMT variant show a greater response to adverse stimuli. So if you think about that, it's kind of interesting. Increased susceptibility to anxiety disorders. So these are the people that maybe come back from combat, and they're the ones that have PTSD, where another person that was in that same battle doesn't have PTSD. Have you ever wondered about that? And it can definitely be a genetic variant that's causing them to be more susceptible to PTSD disorders. Or you may remember something that happened in your childhood that was really traumatic to you, but you ask your siblings and they just don't have any memory of it. It's like, wow. So it can cause us to like store information or memories as anxious, or, you know, greater response. We had a greater response to it than our siblings did, and it can be genetically determined. I think it's just a fascinating thing. So COMT, the A allele, we're looking at the COMT V158M variant, and if they have the A allele, and I'll show you that on a report here in a minute, but they label it a worrier. So the other one, the G allele, is called a warrior, W-A-R-R-I-E-R. So it's the warrior-warrior hypothesis. These people are more exploratory. They have lower COMT activity, so therefore they're going to have higher dopamine levels and a lower pain threshold. These people, like if you try to adjust them, if your chiropractor's out there, if you do acupuncture, they're the ones that are screaming and yelling, and you're like, I barely touched you. And you just kind of consider them to be sort of wimpy, but it could be that they have this COMT or COMT variant. Enhanced vulnerability to stress, and again, more efficient at processing information under most conditions. And so an allele, let me explain that. It's a variant form of a gene, and some genes have a variety of different forms which are located at the same position on a chromosome. Humans are called diploid organisms because they have two alleles at each genetic locus, with one allele inherited from each parent. So when we look at the COMT variant here, you can see the allele. This is an AA allele, and the result is homozygous for that variant. So that AA allele, backing up here, this person is going to be this, the worrier. Okay, and they have difficulty breaking down dopamine. So they're going to have higher than normal levels of dopamine, but again, usually smarter than average. They also have a homozygous on the second one here too, which adds to the problem with breaking down their dopamine. And then there's the other variant, the G allele, and this is considered a warrior. They're less exploratory, they have higher COMT activity. In other words, they break down dopamine better, so they're going to have lower dopamine levels, and they're going to have a higher pain threshold, better stress resiliency, albeit with a modest reduction in executive cognitive performance under most conditions. So it's kind of fascinating to look at those alleles and the differences there. So here's the COMT, and you can see it's a green. It shows a positive for a GG, which means that that enzyme is working well. In fact, a little bit too well. It breaks down dopamine a little too fast. Normally, we would consider green good. You know, green is like normal and good. But in the case of the COMTs, a plus minus is actually beneficial because it keeps your dopamine from breaking down too quickly or too slowly. It kind of balances that breakdown of our neurotransmitters. When you see green, green, green like this person is often a low adrenal person. They're the ones that you're going to have to continually balance their adrenal glands because they break down their neurotransmitters a little too quickly. Okay, so the Val158 alleles may be associated with an advantage in the processing of risk stimuli. These are warriors. These are the guys that don't come back with PTSD. They're the the ones that survive and have a stronger warrior strategy going on. And the MET alleles, again, better, the warrior strategy, better memory and attention. And some evidence suggests that the Val alleles are associated with schizophrenia, and the MET alleles are associated with anxiety. That came out of CNS Spectrums, October 2006. MET allele carriers show greater sensory and affective ratings of pain and more negative internal affective state. Opposite effects are observed in the Val homozygotes. Again, pain sensitivity in fibromyalgia patients. There are some findings that fibromyalgia might be associated with the COMT gene variants. And again, high sensation-seeking scores in female subjects and add to the increasing evidence for gender-specific role of COMT in normal and dysfunctional behavior. So those girls that are just, wild children going out there doing the novelty-seeking behavior can be due to a genetic variant. It's just fascinating, and I'm sure you're thinking of somebody. As we go along, you're probably going, oh, that's why this person behaves this way. And it explained a lot to me, too, about myself as well. When I did my genetic report, I have some COMTs in there, not major. I don't have the 158 variant, but they did say you have novelty-seeking behavior, and it's like, yeah, I do. I'm always like, what's next? Let's go do this. So it's, again, this is going to be in the book that I'm writing called Genetic Compassion, and it's all about understanding ourselves a little better about why we behave the way we do. The SNP's located on the CYP1B1. That's your cytochrome P450, one of the enzymes that breaks down estrogens. The COMT or the HSD17B1 gene seem to be associated with breast tissue density in estrogen-related factors. So the modifying effects of estrogen-related factors should be considered when evaluating associations of polymorphisms in estrogen-related genes with premenopausal mammographic density. So those breast lumps can be due to a COMT variant. Schizophrenia-associated problems in attention, cognitive processes, and working memory have been linked to frontal lobe dopamine deficiencies. And then the COMT polymorphism is linked to early onset major depressive disorders and suicide. And what is schizophrenia? I had to kind of look it up because I think a lot of us kind of think of schizophrenia as multiple personality disorder, and it really is not that. It's a mental disorder often characterized by abnormal social behavior and failure to recognize what is real. Common symptoms include false beliefs, unclear or confused thinking, auditory hallucinations, reduced social engagement, and emotional expression, and lack of motivation. And it can be a degree, anywhere from hearing voices to just feeling like you don't want to be social or unmotivated. This, generally due to the low dopamine levels, where you'll see the low motivation. And I'm sure we all go through sort of phases of that. Doesn't mean we're schizophrenic, but you can kind of associate, if you start to go, wow, I'm really feeling unmotivated and sort of blah, I wonder if my dopamine levels are low, and kind of look at it that way and start to balance your dopamine levels through nutrition. So let's look at this person. I know personally, he's a patient of mine, and he's got some real issues. He's a very talented healer, and he relies on angels, and he relies on his inner voice and his intuition to give pretty amazing readings on people about what's going on in their lives and their inner psyche. And so I wonder, he's got 2 COMTs on the top there, which means, again, higher than normal levels of dopamine, 2 of them, 2 homozygous. So again, higher intelligence. The VDR TAC is there, and those of you that kind of were here for the second webinar on the VDR will understand that that can sometimes lead to low dopamine. So it's possible that they kind of balanced each other out. And the MAO will lead to high serotonin, which can cause a lot of anxiety. But if the MTHFR, that's the variant that helps you absorb folic acid, is not even working in the first place, and you're not even making methyl groups, then it's possible that he isn't feeling any of these anxiety or stress issues, low or high dopamine. He could be kind of at just a low level functioning. And the minute you give somebody like folic acid or methylfolate, somebody like this, you can see you're going to create a lot of anxiety. And so he went off on his own and started reading about the MTHFR and started taking methylfolate. And he came out of his skin. He was really in a bad way. His COMT was not able to break down the dopamine that he was suddenly creating, and the MAO was not able to break down the serotonin he was suddenly creating, and he was having a very rough time of it. And so that's why I say you got to know what else is going on in their report before you just start in with a methylfolate. So again, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, just kind of review of where we are in the pathway. High dopamine has been observed in patients with paranoia, irritability, high blood pressure, short-term memory problems, poor GI function along with ADD symptoms. You remember that a lot of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut, so it can affect our gut function. Low dopamine is associated with attention difficulties, apathy, memory deficits, poor fine motor control, cravings, and addictions. So severely low dopamine, these people are craving whatever it is they're craving, whether it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, alcohol. Those of us that are, I kind of say this in jest, but I think it's kind of true. Those of us who are healers, we're kind of addicted to the results of what we do. It's like it is so rewarding to have somebody go, wow, you changed my life. You gave me my brain back, my health back, and it's like, yes, that's our dopamine hit. And so I think it kind of makes us good practitioners as well, in a positive note. So norepinephrine, high norepinephrine can be associated with high blood pressure, insulin resistance, stress, and obesity. Generally, these patients have high blood pressure and or insulin resistance. Or low norepinephrine can be associated with fibromyalgia and other pain disorders. Patients who regularly engage in very strenuous exercise will end up with low norepinephrine, and then will definitely associate with mood disorders. High epinephrine levels are seen with anxiety, hyperactivity, and stress. Low with fatigue, poor concentration, low cortisol levels due to adrenal insufficiency and adrenal burnout. So these are the people we give, the de-stress formula, or we give them some kind of glandular product, adrenal complex, that gets them, back up off the floor. But if we get their methylation pathway going, they generally don't need that support anymore. They start to make their own neurotransmitters and hormones, and that's what we're about. So tyrosine, again, just a review of the pathways. If you take a look at the COMT MAOs, they're everywhere here. COMT MAO, COMT MAO. There's a lot of crossover here. between these two pathways. That's why I wanted to do them together, because they're very much associated with each other. So how do we test these? And I'm a kinesiologist, and I've had many discussions with people that don't do kinesiology that want to be able to do this work, and I got to tell you, it's a bit tricky. You can do it. You can certainly do it, and you can get your neurotransmitters tested through certain various labs, and you can see if they're high or low, and you can look at their genetics and kind of start to spot where their problems are. But when you start combining different variants together, I haven't seen anything that does it like the kinesiology testing does, and so I'm seeing people come to my seminars. We're doing methylation seminars throughout the country that don't do muscle testing, and they're like, "Wow, I'm turned on. I want to learn muscle testing because I can see how incredibly important it is when you start to look at the whole symphony that's created with this methylation pathway." And so we created testing vials. And when it comes to testing COMT variants, we're going to be using dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And we're using a couple of points, adverse and beneficial. And if it's weak on the adverse point, that generally means that those neurotransmitters are too high, and they probably have that COMT variant. Or if it's strong, if it's beneficial, if that person needs dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, or cortisol, that probably means they don't have that variant, or they have the green variant where they break down these neurotransmitters too quickly. So they're low in dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, or cortisol, or they're just not making them in the first place, which could mean they're not methylating in general. So the goal is to get them balanced. You want dopamine that's not too high, not too low. You want it right in the middle, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. You want those all to be smack dab in the middle of balanced. And so using the kinesiology testing, we can really kind of nail these balance points. So we're also introducing the kinesiology. I do holistic kinesiology, and we're going to be teaching these classes in Phoenix in February and March. And for those of you out there that don't do kinesiology or muscle testing, we'll be showing you how to do that, doing the basics. So this is the Kinesiology Test Kit that we created, and it has all those neurotransmitters in there. It has all the substrates so that you can evaluate what's going on in this pathway and start to get it balanced. So when it comes to how do we balance the COMT variant, and the big winners are that trace min plus and the core level bond matrix. So if you're a kinesiologist, you would place the epinephrine or adrenaline on somebody, and if they go weak, put the trace min plus on their core level bone matrix and see if it balances it out. And you know that that's going to help those minerals help that enzyme, the catecholamine methyltransferase enzyme, work more efficiently. So if they've got a genetic variant there, they may have a higher than normal need for these kind of nutrients to help that enzyme work better to break down the neurotransmitters. Iodine rescue does the same. Total boron. Boron's been shown to help reduce stress hormones and lower sex hormone binding globulin and release free testosterone and free hormones. The manganese GC helps that variant work, that enzyme work better as well. And then thyroid support, core level thyroid, total thyroid work really well. So we created a methylation test kit that has all of the remedies that you're going to need to get this pathway balanced, and those are available at Nutri-West. And we'll have them, just a side note, those of you that are coming to the symposium in San Diego in January 21st to the 24th, we'll be there, and we'll have some of these test kits on hand. Lots of amazing speakers, including Dr. Tui herself. Lots of really good information coming. I'm starting to see some of the PowerPoint notes from some of these speakers. It's awesome stuff. Incredible location in San Diego. It's a resort and spa that's on an island. Just looks beautiful. So I hope you guys can join us there, and we'll have a lot of these materials available for you, and we'll be testing some of the doctors and demonstrating. We're going to be demonstrating this technique there as well. So iodine rescue, again, very beneficial for balancing this pathway. Core level bone matrix, trace min plus, And boron, interesting information about boron. A study published in Anti-Cancer Agents in Medicinal Chemistry noted that boron-containing compounds are most effective against prostate, breast, cervical, and lung imbalances. That's because boron interferes with the reproduction of aberrant cells. Boron improves manual dexterity, eye-hand coordination, attention, perception, encoding, and short-term memory. Boron supplementation showed a significant decrease in sex hormone binding globulin, high-sensitive CRP and TNF-alpha levels. Showed an increase in testosterone and estradiol. Reported beneficial actions of boron include joint support, bone support and maintenance, central nervous system support, free radical reduction, hormone facilitation, immune response, inflammation, oxidative stress modulation. So if you're not using boron, I really encourage you to take a look at it. Again, it's not one of those more common things that we use, but it can be a real powerhouse, especially when in the evening, you know, if you're having trouble with your patients getting them to sleep and you find that their cortisol levels are kind of spiking before bed, sometimes, you know, not only the pro-cortisol balance, you can try that, but also sometimes the total boron can really help bring down those excitatory neurotransmitters. Don't forget, L-tyrosine is an enhancer. It's a precursor to these neurotransmitters, DSF, the de-stress formula, or as some call it, delicious salivary formula, yummy stuff. Adrenal life, upregulation of the VDR is how we make the catecholamine enhancers. And you know, we talked last webinar about the vitamins A, D, and K helping that vitamin D receptor work correctly, and so that you can make dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Don't forget your cofactors, the folic acid P5P, iron, magnesium, zinc, S, SAGO-C, 500, vitamin C, super important. Okay, so on to the MAO. I better speed this up because we got a lot of information to still cover, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. It breaks down the neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, the catecholamines, helps detoxify ammonia derivatives, or xenobiotics, and it uses pyridoxal 5-phosphate, or the active form of B6, to balance serotonin. Also involved in histamine breakdown. So for those people that you're having difficulty getting their histamine levels down, or allergies, it can be because of this monoamine oxidase. So something as simple as P5P can actually help the allergies. So if you go to the full report on the MTHFR, you can see here, this is actually my report, and I've got 4 plants in the MAOA area. And so this it is kind of interesting for me to see this, because sometimes I have a little bit of a temper, and I get a little grouchy, and so I was like, oh wow, no wonder. So I better continue to take my B6, because that really helps break down that extra serotonin that can build up. And especially, you know, I moved to the Keys, the Florida Keys, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a high altitude, and when you go to a lower altitude, it increases your serotonin and lowers your dopamine. So, you know, just a hint there that altitude can have effect on your brain chemistry, and especially if you have an MAO there, you might want to pay attention to that. So I found I was a little grouchier when I got to a lower altitude and started taking B6, and it really helped. And zinc is another one that can really help this enzyme work better. So MAO they create increased or decreased levels of serotonin due to a lack of efficiency or a hyperactivity of this enzyme. It can go both ways. So genetic defects in the MAO are associated with schizophrenia and personality disorders, sometimes referred to as the warrior gene. The frequency distribution of variants in the MAO gene differs between ethnic groups. 59% of black men show the MAO variant, 54% of Chinese men, 56% of Maori, and 34% of Caucasian men. Studies have linked methylation of the MAO gene with nicotine and alcohol dependence in women. And a second MAOA vintner promoter P2 influences epigenetic methylation in women only and interacts with having experienced child abuse to influence antisocial personality disorder symptoms, also only in women. So what is that really saying? It's not the gene that's going to cause you to have a personality disorder. It's a combination of your environment and the gene. So those people that are raised in really healthy environments and have an MAO, they can still be perfectly normal functioning people. And that's another thing to remember. It's not only the gene-gene interaction, but it's also your gene environment that creates a problem. So in Italian, this was an interesting study. It was an Italian appeal court in 2009 cut the sentence of a convicted murderer by 1 year on the grounds that he had a version of the MAOA gene, which has been linked to aggression and violence. So a rare genetic disorder caused by MAOA mutation leads to MAOA deficiency, and in turn an excess of monoamine neurotransmitters causing excessive impulsive behavior, including hypersexuality, sleep disorder, extreme mood swings, as well as a tendency to violence, which is known as Bruner syndrome. Compared to individuals with high expression allele, healthy men and women with the MAOAL reported higher trait aggression, higher interpersonal sensitivity, and showed greater dorsal anterior cingulated cortex activity associated with rejection-related distress in response to social exclusion. So, if you think about those people that, like, they didn't get chosen for the volleyball team or whatever, they take that a lot harder if they happen to have an MAO variant, and they can head into more social exclusion and kind of begin to hide in a hole, essentially, and become socially imbalanced. So it's kind of an interesting thing. When you add, again, environment to a gene, sometimes it can lead to these sort of experiences in life. There's some little bit of road rage going on there. And when when we look at this kind of thing anymore, I look at that and I go, wow, there's an MAO. This guy could sure use a little B6. I just look at things differently. Instead of getting offended by it, I go, wow, that person's really out of balance, and I think he's probably got a genetic variant here. So hopefully you're looking at things a little differently like this as well. So, and MAO levels are elevated. In other words, it works faster to break down serotonin by an average of 34% in patients with major depressive disorder. So genetic association studies examining the relationship between high activity MAO variants and depression has shown major depression along with sleep disturbances. So you'll see the green on the MAO. If it's green, that means they break down serotonin a little faster than they would if there was a homozygous or a heterozygous variant there. This polymorphism may be associated with psychiatric diseases. I just went and looked at different studies where there was panic disorder, obsessive compulsive, bipolar, Alzheimer's, and schizophrenia. Also, a multiple personality disorder. I had one of my doctors call and say, or she sent me an email actually and said that she had a patient with multiple personality disorders, 60 different personalities since she was a small child. I think this woman was like in her 40s. They all came together in one personality, and she was just blown away. She didn't expect that to happen. I've never seen it happen, but these are the kind of reports that are coming in from the doctors out there that are using this methylation pathway balancing technique. Serotonin is also depleted by stress, sugar, excess carbohydrates, alcohol, lack of protein, nutrient vitamin deficiencies, pain, and of course methylation defects. So it's not just ignore environmental or dietary kind of things. If you have an MAO, you're going to want to watch these things closer. Sugar or excess carbohydrates in the diet is going to make your MAO worse. It's going to make you more irritable. Alcohol, lack of protein, etc. It's going to create even more of a problem for you, so it's even more critical that you watch these variants that are under your control. Lowered serotonin levels are associated with obesity, carbohydrate craving, depression, impulsivity, violence, and alcoholism. This came out of a book called Potatoes Not Prozac, where Kathleen Desmaisons has a great success with helping people with alcoholism through nutrition. And so the other interesting thing here is that I've had people that were overweight, that were obese, that came back in after we started them on methylation pathways, and they said, you know what, my cravings went away, and they're like, I feel so much better about myself because I know it wasn't just my lack of willpower. There was an actual biochemical thing that was going on in the body causing me to crave carbohydrates, because you get a little dopamine hit from it or a serotonin hit, and it makes you feel better temporarily. So it's fascinating to see people go, yeah, I don't crave carbs anymore, and they're really getting into balance. Back to this real quick. We had a patient with this early on when I started doing this. I worked with a methamphetamine addict, and the results were so immediate and so stunning that I just was blown away by it. She stopped having any cravings at all for methamphetamines the minute she was on a methylation pathway, and the minute she ran out of her supplements and said she couldn't afford it, they came back, and she fell off the wagon and started using again. Her family got together and paid for her supplements so that she could get balanced again. It was dramatic. It was really amazing. So again, these are your cofactors: zinc, B1, B6, folate, iron, B3, calcium, zinc, B6, magnesium, vitamin C, all needed to get from tryptophan, from your protein intake of proteins, making stomach acid, tryptophan, 5-HTP, and serotonin. You can have variants in these particular genes as well, and that's in the advanced class. We talk about these, the dopa decarboxylase and the tryptophan hydroxylase. Copper blocks a lot of these nutrients. I just thought that was an interesting little slide where you can have copper toxicity, and zinc will often balance that copper so that you can make these neurotransmitters efficiently. Research demonstrates that serotonin levels are high in such, sorry, typo there, in such disorders as schizophrenia, autism, mania, depression, anxiety, organic brain disease, mental retardation, Alzheimer's, and anorexia. And even though the causes of violence are broadly environmental, they are nonetheless biological, because environmental forces are mediated biologically, in this case, by, among other things, serotonin. This is out of an interesting article in the New Yorker magazine. What makes somebody like this? Probably a lot of us have seen the movie The Silence of the Lambs, and what makes somebody a psychopath is a very fascinating thing. I watched a video by this guy. I'll go to it in a second. His name is James Fallon, and he wrote a book called The Psychopath Inside. And what he found was really fascinating. He did studies on psychopaths, and he looked at brain scans of these people that were mass murderers or just really deranged people that were in jail, and he began to look at their genetics as well. And he decided to do brain scans on his family, all the people in his family, and did their genetics as well. And as he was looking at the results, he came across one in his family and started looking at it, and he realized it was himself, that he had the brain scan frontal lobe damage and the MAO gene. And he was like, wow, I don't feel like a psychopath. I haven't gone out and committed any crimes, and what's missing here? And it turns out, it's environment. He was like one of the only surviving children in the family. A lot of the other children died early, and he was given a lot of attention as a kid, and he feels like that really made him not become a psychopath. That he could have gone down that path had his environment contributed to it. So we can't forget the importance of childhood treatment. So if they had locked him in a closet or beat him or somehow abused him, it's likely that he would have ended up in a bad place. So it's a fascinating interview to get a chance to look at it, and it's Neuroscience and the Psychopath Inside. The psychopath's genetics and the development of the brain are discussed with neuroscientist James Fallon, who recently recorded his own troubling genetic discoveries in the book The Psychopath Inside. The predisposition to violence, impulsivity, and the genetic markers that can influence people toward criminality are detailed with attention to Fallon's experience in this Crime Time interview with Allison Hope Weiner, and there's the link there. So I hope you get a chance to look at that. It's really interesting. But he went to his family and friends, and he had this list of characteristics of a psychopath, and he showed it to his family and friends and said, "Do I do any of these things?" And they said, "Yeah, you're actually kind of scary in the way that you can make very cold decisions about things." And he was like, "Wow, really? He didn't know. He didn't know his effect on people." And so it's just really interesting. So don't forget SAG-OC or C1000-TR. Dopamine monooxygenase, which converts dopamine and norepinephrine, is a vitamin C-dependent enzyme. And vitamin C is required for the conversion of 5-HTP to serotonin. So the big star, though, for balancing the MAO is the vitamin B6, or pyridoxine. It aids in the processing of amino acids and hormones. It's needed in the manufacture of serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine, and for the breakdown of neurotransmitters. It works better than B6 because it's the active form, and some people do have difficulty activating B6 to the pyridoxal 5-phosphate form, and it's especially important for those with MAO or COMT defects. However, and here's the trick, if they have a CBS variant you could inadvertently cause them to upregulate that CBS and cause them to dump heavy metals quickly. And that's why I like this, the kinesiology, because it'll tell you when you're ready to add that B6 in, or when you need the B6 or the pyridoxal triphosphate, and when you can't use it yet because there's a pathway not open. So this was, depression was improved as well as gluten sensitivity in celiac patients with the use of B6. And what we have found is that with the methylation pathways, we're finding that celiac, I've seen celiac go away. I have patients that were diagnosed celiac, a disease, you know, they have the blood test, they have, you know, proof that they were, and once we get the methylation balance, suddenly they can eat gluten. And a lot of their food sensitivities go away, the leaky gut repairs. So it's just a fascinating thing. When a plus or homozygous MAO mutation is combined with a plus or a plus minus COMT158 mutation, one may be more prone to develop obsessive compulsive disorder, mood swings, aggression, violent behavior, and personality. So it's that combo again that we got to look at, the two together. And then the deficiencies can look like this. So dopamine deficiencies, we know, can lead to Parkinsonism-like symptoms. And serotonin deficits will lead to OCD-like symptoms, obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. But together, we're looking at depression and craving. So here's an interesting little profile that I came across as one of my patients, and I was like, wow, interesting. Look at all the reds there. Well, this person is fairly balanced. She's one of my patients, and I look at her and go, this is weird, because I'm looking at your genetics, and I'm like, wow. But here's the deal. She's with this MTHFR here, and this MTHFR here, she's not even making methyl groups in the first place. And again, you wouldn't want to start somebody like this on just methylfolate and B12 and stand back, because these variants are going to be activated very quickly. She's going to get into anxiety, irritation, OCD. It's not going to be pretty. Actually, she does have a mild OCD. She's a house cleaning maniac. And some irritability as well. So you can see a little bit of activity in MAO. But if we started up these pathways with folic acid and B12, you're going to see these really go to town. So if you've got to balance these first before you can start in and start the methyl groups being made. So just want to impress that upon you. And that's what makes what we're doing a little different than what other people are doing. I'm going to skip over this one because this is another gene that came across my desk, and it's the 5-HTT gene. It's the one that helps you uptake serotonin transporter, and that's for another day. That's, you know, kind of some of the advanced teaser here. We'll be looking at that. The GABA transporter, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin transporters. So those are to come. We'll look again. Those are advanced topics. So hopefully you're not thinking that these neurotransmitter issues are a Prozac deficiency, like a lot of people do. There's big money to be made. I just got to get on my soapbox for a second here. You may or may not agree with me, but the literature is pretty amazing. And previously non-suicidal patients who took the drug had a 5-fold higher rate of suicides and suicide attempts than those on older antidepressants, and a 3-fold higher rate than those taking placebos. But it's interesting, and it's usually suicide, homicide-suicide, and taking a bunch of other people out. And this is something we never saw as kids. And a lot of the people that are, you know, mass suicide, mass homicide and then suicide are on antidepressants. So it's not the guns. Gun control isn't going to solve this problem. I really believe that it's a problem with the antidepressants that a lot of people are on. So again, that's my opinion, but it's just really confounding. We win. In 2004, global sales of antidepressant agents exceeded $15 billion. This is 2004. I don't have the current studies on that, but that's even back in 2004. Japan is currently a relatively unimportant market for antidepressants. They only have about 5% of the global market. European market is 19%. The United States is 71% of the global sales of antidepressants. So we got some work to do, guys. I hope you're going to work with these people and help get them balanced and get them off, you know, work with their doctors, of course. You can't take them off antidepressants, but if you can work with their doctors on this and help them get balanced, we've seen incredible results. Or just keep them, more importantly, keep them from going there. It's just a sad a sad state of affairs. And I wonder if some of that 71% is because we do so much advertising of our antidepressants on TV. It's just disturbing. Increased mortality with those antidepressants as well. So I'm going to move along because we're about out of time. So some tools we've developed, and you can go to methylationproducts.com. We have testing vials, a set of 53 metabolites that I showed you there. The Methylation Test Kit from Nutri-West is amazing. We have the methylation posters that you can buy and the interactive methylation program, the Nutri-West poster as well will show you what nutrients you use with certain variants. So you can use those. And then there's an interactive computer program for doctors and patients that's quite informative. It's a great way to learn methylation. These are the locations of the methylation seminars in 2016. We're going to be all over the country doing this. The response has just been amazing. The class size is growing every time we do it. And people are getting it, and I love the feedback. It's been incredible. And, I'm hearing from doctors all over the country going, oh my gosh, I can't believe the headways that we're making it with patients that we couldn't get anywhere with. So hopefully one of these is going to fit into your schedule around the country, and you can pick up the weekend seminar. We're doing it 2 days, all day Saturday and half day Sunday. And then, again, sorry, I said February, March earlier. It's February, April that we're doing the Holistic Kinesiology classes. If you're wanting to learn kinesiology, I highly recommend these. And then here's some other resources. Again, the holistickinesiology.com or holisticmethylation.com. You can order those products. To order the Nutri-West test kits, contact your Nutri-West distributor. The genetic tests, the best we have right now is www.23andme.com. And these are the templates. We put them through the geneticgenie.org and MTHFR support.com. So do we have any questions out there? I think we have maybe a minute or two.
Great.
Lynn, are you?
Yes, thank you so much, Jay. This is all fascinating information. The question that I see is coming from someone who says if you have bipolar / suicide on the father's side of the family for 2 generations, would it be more crucial to check your gene SNPs? I'm going to say yes. But yeah, I'm going to hand that over to you with the request also that when you finish the question, if you wouldn't mind going over the brief introduction to the webinar, because we had a snafu with the recording, which started with the gene variation chart. So after you have answered the question, and maybe people who have listened to the whole webinar need to leave the webinar, that we might be able to add just that few short minutes for people who are coming in on the webinar with the gene variation chart.
Sure. Is that, let's see, where was that? Here is where it started?
No, the other gene variation chart that had the RSID numbers.
Oh, wow. All the way here?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Yes. So it was a review, really, of where we have gone. And this is the third in the methylation series. Our first series was an overview of methylation, the methylation pathways and how we make methyl groups. The second was on the vitamin D receptor and how we begin to absorb vitamin D. As you know, chronic low vitamin D levels are pretty rampant in our society. And so we were looking here, during the first seminar, we're looking at the generators up here. These two, this is essentially the B12 or the homocysteine pathway, and this is the MTHFR, the folic acid pathway. It's how we absorb B12 and folic acid and make methyl groups, so end result being methylation here. And then, as we're going along with these seminars, the second seminar covered this area right here, the vitamin D receptor, and how we absorb vitamin D, and then how we make, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, and serotonin. Ultimately, that vitamin D receptor upregulates the tyrosine to dopamine conversion here through an enzyme called tyrosine hydroxylase. And then this third seminar is covering this area down here, the MAO catecholamine methyltransferase pathways that break down these neurotransmitters that we've made. So, you know, when I teach in the seminars, I teach that you have to balance anything out here first and then work your way back up. But I'm teaching you in the opposite direction. So I'm teaching you, like, up here we make methyl groups. Those methyl groups go down, and they're either going to detox you from heavy metals, chemicals, pesticides will be detoxed down this way. And if you have blocks along this area, then you're going to detox too quickly if you turn on your methyl groups and don't open these pathways. So second seminar talked about how we upregulate that vitamin D receptor. Third one, we're covering the breakdown of these neurotransmitters that are then created so that we don't create irritability, anxiety, and depressive issues. So again, you know, methylation pathways require B12 and folic acid, but they may have a genetic variant that prevents absorption, and that's why you have to look at the active forms for these people. So for folic acid, you need to look at methylfolate. For B12, you might want to look at hydroxy B12, hydroxycobalamin, or methylcobalamin. And those neurotransmitters require methyl groups to produce tetrahydrobiopterin, which is the precursor to those neurotransmitters. It has to be activated by the VDR to produce comines, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. And then once we produce those, you need to break them down. Otherwise, we're going to end up with anger, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, and sympathetic dominance. So when we look at this pathway, you know, again, this rate-limiting step, this is how the VDR, the vitamin D receptor, fits into this whole scenario, is that it upregulates the tyrosine to L-DOPA production. So if you have a variant, you can actually have a variant right here, or you could have low vitamin D levels because of your vitamin D receptor issues, and you don't even make it to L-DOPA. So you can see how this could be related to Parkinson's. The low DOPA is often a feature of Parkinsonianism. So also, you know, these are your adrenal hormones. So if you can't even make it through these pathways and make these neurotransmitters, then you're going to have low adrenal hormones. So again, we've been using the 23andMe test because it's easy. They've raised the price to $199. It used to be $99, and we used to stock them in our clinic, but I can't afford to have a bunch of neurotransmitter tests sitting around at $199. So we are sending our patients to the website now. And it is a saliva test. It's easy to do. It takes about 6 weeks to get your results back. But when you do, you get your raw data back, and then you put it through these templates. The genetic Genie report or the MTHFR support report are the two main ones that we're using at this point to begin to look at these variants and how your genes are functioning in your body. So you can see on top here, this is the catecholamine methyltransferase up here that we're going to be talking about during this webinar, and the MAO is right here. There's your VDR right there, MTR, MTHFR right here. So you can see how critical this pathway is in looking at your entire methylation pathway. So that's what we're going to be covering in great detail, is how these catecholamine methyltransferases and the MAO, the monoamine oxidase, lead to neuropsychiatric disorders. Is that about where we...
Great. Yes, that's wonderful, Jay. Thank you so much. And several people have asked where to access the webinar in the future. If you'll notice that when you get your invitation, it's noted that they will be posted on the Nutri-West website within a week. It takes a week to get transferred into an MP4 and then in a file to go up on the website, and all you need is to contact your distributor if you don't already have access to the website, because your distributor, your Nutri-West distributor, will give you an access code. It's called a distributor code, and with that code you can establish an account on the website, and with that you can access all of Dr. Dunn's webinars. So as she mentioned, this is the third in a series, and I do highly recommend that if you haven't heard the Methylation 1 and 2 webinars, that you go back to the website and listen to them, because they are fascinating and very, very good background information. The person who asked about when addressing methylation, shouldn't you keep into consideration the epigenetic factors like sleep and stress and diet and lifestyle? And I'd just like to say, since we're running out of time, that yes, of course you do, and Dr. Dunn does as well. So what I would suggest to you is that you attend one of her seminars, because this seminar is so complete and thorough that you would be awed by the comprehensiveness of it and realize that those factors are indeed addressed. So Dr. Dunn, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we just tell everyone to please join us for the fourth in the series, which is to be determined, but stay alert, watch your Nutri-West emails, and you will get an invitation.
Sounds good. I'm going to be going over the nitric oxide synthase pathways and the production of, the neuronal damage and the superoxide peroxynitrate molecules. So,
wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, and any of those of you out there who do not have the Nutri-West contact phone number, I am going to give it to you now. It is very easy. It's 1-800-443-3333. So all you have to remember is that it's an 800 number, 2 4s, 4 3s. So 800-443-3333. If you had any questions, you'll get directed to the person who can answer them. You can get information on access to that website to see the webinars and any other questions that you might have. And don't forget to join us for the Winter Symposium on the 21st of January at the Konakai Resort and Spa that Dr. Dunn mentioned earlier. We're going to have a dozen speakers there. It's going to be very awesome, very nice scenario, so please join us. And Dr. Dunn, thank you so much again for an informative webinar, and we'll look forward to the next one.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dr. Tue. I really appreciate your help.
Ditto. And signing off now.
Bye.
Bye.